the music is stripped down to its bare essentials: a heavy drum, a thumping bass, and a voice full of raw emotion. This was the sound that launched a global movement. But the albums that started it all have been left in the shadows. What secret techniques did producers use to create sounds that seemed to come from another dimension? Why were these game-changing albums ignored by the mainstream? Could one of these records hold the key to understanding the very soul of reggae? Let's uncover the real story. 1. The Congos, Heart of the Congos, 1977. When you talk about legendary reggae producers, one name stands above the rest: Lee "Scratch" Perry. He was a wizard in the studio, a mad genius who could bend sound to his will. In 1977, he brought together a vocal trio called the Congos to record an album at his famous Black Ark studio. The result was Heart of the Congos, a record so mystical and deep it sounded like it was channeled from another dimension. But here is the strange part of the story. Perry, for reasons that are still debated, decided the album was too perfect for the world. He pressed only a few hundred copies and essentially buried his own masterpiece. What many overlooked is that this album was the absolute peak of Perry's creative powers. He used 4-track recording equipment to create a sound so dense and layered it felt like an 8-track recording. He recorded the sound of a cow mooing and used it as a bass line. He buried microphones at the base of a palm tree to capture a deep, resonant drum sound. The Congos' voices, a mix of a soaring falsetto and 2 rich baritones, floated over these strange, swirling rhythms, singing of spiritual truths and ancient rivers. It was a sound that was both earthy and otherworldly. To put it mildly, the album was a commercial failure at first, a ghost that only a few hardcore fans knew about. But its influence grew over the years, a slow-burning fire that eventually spread around the world. From the mystical chants of the countryside, our next album took reggae to the city streets. 2. Justin Hinds and the Dominoes, Jezebel, 1976. Justin Hinds was one of the original voices of Jamaican music. He had been around since the early days of ska, and his voice was like a force of nature, powerful, raw, and full of emotion. For years, he and his group, the Dominoes, were hitmakers. But as reggae got more polished and commercial in the mid-70s, Hinds went in the opposite direction. His 1976 album, Jezebel, was a return to the raw, rootsy sound that had started it all. It was an album that felt less like a commercial product and more like a spiritual gathering. But the real shock here is how this album built a bridge between the past and the future of reggae. The rhythms on Jezebel were deeply tied to the traditional Nyabinghi drumming of the Rastafarian faith. This wasn't just a beat, it was a heartbeat, a slow, deliberate pulse that felt ancient and powerful. This grounding in tradition gave the music a weight and an authenticity that was missing from a lot of reggae at the time. Yet, at the same time, the stripped-down, heavy sound of the album was incredibly forward-thinking. The focus on the drum and bass, the space between the notes, laid the groundwork for the dub revolution that was just around the corner. Many people are crazy about dub music, but they might not realize its DNA is hidden in records like this. What many overlooked is that Justin Hinds wasn't just singing songs, he was telling stories. His lyrics were like proverbs, full of wisdom and warnings, delivered with a passion that was impossible to ignore. This album was a masterclass in raw spiritual power. But what happens when you take that power and strip away the vocals almost entirely? 3. Ross Michael and the Sons of Negus, Dadawa, Peace and Love, 1974.
Oh, clap your hands, all.
In the early 1970s, reggae was still finding its spiritual voice. One of the most important figures in this movement was Ross Michael, a master of the Nyabinghi drums. His group, the Sons of Negus, wasn't a typical band. They were a spiritual community, and their music was a form of prayer. Their 1974 album, Dadawa, which means peace and love, was unlike anything that came before it. It was almost entirely instrumental, a hypnotic journey into the heart of Rasta spirituality. The truly groundbreaking aspect of this record is that it completely abandoned the structure of pop music. There were no verses or choruses, there were just long, flowing chants and complex, multi-layered drum patterns. This was music designed for meditation, not for dancing. You see, the album was a bold statement. It declared that reggae was not just party music, it was a sacred art form with deep African roots. The sound was incredibly organic, recorded with a raw immediacy that made you feel like you were sitting in the drum circle with the musicians. To put it mildly, this album was not a commercial success. It was too strange, too spiritual for the mainstream, but its influence was immense. It showed a generation of reggae musicians that there was another path, one that led away from the pop charts and toward a deeper, more profound connection with their roots. What many overlooked is that Dadawa helped to cement the connection between reggae music and the Rastafarian faith in the minds of people all over the world. This album showed the power of the drum, but our next album would prove that a single horn could be just as revolutionary. 4. Rico Rodriguez, Man from Warika, 1976. Rico Rodriguez was a legend. A trombone player who had been a part of Jamaican music since the very beginning, he played on countless classic ska and rocksteady records. But in 1976, he created his masterpiece, an instrumental album called Man from Warika. This record wasn't just a collection of songs, it was a musical journey that connected the dots between the vibrant streets of Kingston and the smoky jazz clubs of London. It was an album that expanded the very definition of what reggae could be. But here is the real story. The album was recorded with some of the best musicians in Jamaica, including the legendary rhythm section of Sly and Robbie. The grooves they laid down were deep and heavy, a perfect foundation for Rico's incredible trombone playing. His horn was the lead voice, singing, crying, and telling stories without a single word. What made this album so special was its fusion of sounds. You could hear the influence of jazz greats like Don Drummond, but there was also a heavy dose of the new, militant dub sound that was taking over Jamaica. The thing is, this album became a secret weapon in the UK. Young punk and new wave musicians heard Man from Warika and were blown away by its power and its coolness. It helped to inspire the two-tone ska revival movement, with bands like The Specials citing Rico as a major influence. What many overlooked is that this one album did more to connect reggae with the British music scene than almost any other record of its time. This album was a testament to the power of a single instrument. Our next entry proves that a whole orchestra of them could take reggae to an even stranger place. 5. Cedric M. Brooks, The Light of Saba, 1976.
Before a man can enter the kingdom of Jah.
Cedric M. Brooks was a musical visionary. A saxophonist with a background in jazz, he saw connections between sounds that no one else did. In the mid-70s, he formed a group called The Light of Saba, and their music was a wild experimental fusion of reggae, jazz, and traditional African rhythms. Their 1976 album of the same name was a journey into the outer limits of Jamaican music, a record so strange and beautiful it still sounds like it's from the future. But not all things are what they seem. On the surface, this might sound like a complicated, difficult album. But the truth is, the music on The Light of Saba is incredibly soulful and accessible. The grooves are deep and hypnotic, and the horn arrangements are lush and beautiful. This was a record that managed to be both experimental and deeply spiritual at the same time. You see, Brooks was a key figure in the Rasta-inspired arts movement of the 70s, and this album was a musical expression of his beliefs. He was using music to explore the connections between Jamaica and Africa, creating a sound that was a true celebration of Black consciousness. To put it mildly, this album was not a huge seller. It was too eclectic for the reggae purists and too Jamaican for the jazz crowd, but its influence has been felt for decades. What many overlooked is how this album laid the groundwork for the world music and Afrobeats movements, proving that the rhythms of Jamaica could be a powerful starting point for a global conversation. From a big band sound to a smooth, soulful vibe, our next album changed the emotional landscape of reggae forever. 6. George Faith, To Be a Lover 1977.
Oh, baby, little darling.
By 1977, the sound of roots reggae was often militant and political. It was the sound of protest and rebellion. But another, softer style was bubbling just beneath the surface, a style called lovers rock. And one of the most important albums in the development of this sound was To Be a Lover by a smooth-voiced singer named George Faith. The album was produced by none other than Lee Scratch Perry, the same mad genius behind Heart of the Congos. But this was a very different side of Perry. The surprising part is how Perry took the heavy, dubby sound of his Black Ark studio and applied it to love songs. The result was a sound that was both romantic and deeply soulful, but with a strange, otherworldly edge. George Faith's voice, a silky, smooth croon, floated over these hypnotic rhythms, singing about love and heartbreak with a raw, emotional honesty. This was a reggae album that you could slow dance to, a record that was more about matters of the heart than matters of the state. Many people are crazy about roots reggae, but what many overlooked is how important lovers rock was in broadening the appeal of the music. It showed that reggae could be vulnerable, that it could be introspective, and that it could speak to the universal human experience of love. To put it mildly, To Be a Lover became a massive hit in the UK, where the lovers rock scene was exploding. It helped to define a new subgenre of reggae and opened the door for a whole new generation of singers. This album showed the power of a son's voice. But our next entry features another son of a legend, a man who would take reggae into a completely new decade. 7. Noel Ellis. Noel Ellis 1983. The early 1980s were a time of massive change in reggae music. The classic root sound was giving way to the new, tougher sound of dancehall. And one of the most interesting albums from this transitional period was the self-titled debut from Noel Ellis, released in 1983. Noel was the son of the legendary rocksteady singer Alton Ellis, so he had music in his blood. But his sound was a unique blend of old and new, a perfect snapshot of a genre in motion. But here is where it gets interesting. The album was recorded in Canada, not Jamaica, and it was produced by the legendary producer Jerry Brown. This gave the record a clean, polished sound that was very different from the raw, gritty feel of many Jamaican recordings. The rhythms were a mix of classic reggae grooves and the emerging digital sounds of early dancehall. And over the top of it all was Noel's voice, a soulful, heartfelt instrument that carried the same emotional weight as his famous father's. What many overlooked is that this album became a cult classic, especially among DJs and collectors. It was a record that was both ahead of its time and deeply rooted in tradition. The thing is, Noel Ellis never became a huge star. He only released this one album, which makes its influence even more remarkable. It's a lost classic, a hidden gem from a time when the entire sound of reggae was being reinvented. From a polished studio sound, our next album takes us back to the raw, experimental world of a true reggae outlaw. 8. Keith Hudson, Playing It Cool and Playing It Right, 1981. Keith Hudson was one of the true originals of reggae music. He was a singer, a producer, and a studio innovator who was constantly pushing the boundaries of the sound. His music was often dark, moody, and experimental, earning him the nickname the Dark Prince of Reggae. In 1981, he released an album called Playing It Cool and Playing It Right, a record that was a masterclass in minimalist dub production and a showcase for his unique, ghostly vocal style. But here is the fascinating detail. Hudson produced the album himself, and he used the studio as an instrument. the sound of the record is incredibly sparse and atmospheric. He would strip the tracks down to their bare essentials, just a heavy bass line, a sharp drum crack, and his voice floating in a sea of echo and reverb. This wasn't just music, it was a soundscape, a spooky, late-night journey into the heart of dub. You see, Hudson was a pioneer of what would later be called dub poetry, a style where the spoken word was just as important as the music. His lyrics were often cryptic and philosophical, delivered in a half-sung, half-spoken style that was incredibly hypnotic. To put it mildly, this album was not a commercial hit. It was too strange, too dark for the mainstream. But its influence on the development of dub music and electronic music is undeniable. What many overlooked is that producers in the UK, especially those involved in the burgeoning post-punk and industrial scenes, heard this record and were deeply inspired by its minimalist, atmospheric sound. This album was the sound of a lone voice in the wilderness. But our next entry shows the power of a singer who could craft a perfect pop song. 9. Bob Andy, The Music Inside Me, 1976. Bob Andy was one of reggae's greatest songwriters. He had a gift for melody and a way with words that was unmatched. He was one of the original members of the legendary group The Paragons, but it was his solo work that truly showcased his genius. His 1976 album, The Music Inside Me, is a perfect example of his craft. It's an album that blends the soulful, conscious lyrics of roots reggae with the smooth, romantic feel of lovers rock. But the real secret of this album is its incredible songwriting. The thing is, Bob Andy was writing songs that were as sophisticated and well-crafted as anything coming out of America or the UK at the time. His melodies were catchy and memorable, and his lyrics were intelligent and thought-provoking. He could sing about love, politics, and spirituality with equal passion and skill. What many overlooked is that this album was a bridge between two worlds. It was a reggae record that had the potential to cross over to a wider international audience. The production was clean and polished, and the songs had a universal appeal that transcended genre. You see, while many reggae artists were focused on the heavy, militant sound of roots, Bob Andy was proving that you could make music that was both conscious and commercially appealing. To put it mildly, this album didn't become a massive global hit, but its influence on a generation of singers and songwriters in Jamaica and the UK was huge. This album showed the power of a great song, but our next artist was a master of a single, unforgettable vocal style. 10. Horace Andy, Dance Hall Style 1982. Horace Andy has one of the most unique and recognizable voices in all of music. His high, haunting falsetto is a sound that, once you hear it, you never forget. He has been a star in Jamaica since the early 70s, but in 1982, he released an album called Dance Hall Style that showed a whole new side of his talent. It was a record that captured the raw energy of the emerging dancehall scene and paired it with some of the heaviest, most hypnotic rhythms ever recorded. But here is the surprising part. The album was produced by a man named Wacky, a legendary producer who ran a small studio in the Bronx, New York. This gave the record a sound that was a unique mix of Jamaican grit and New York City cool. The rhythms, many of them supplied by the legendary Roots Radix Band, were stripped down, heavy, and perfect for the new dancehall sound systems. And over the top of these tough, minimalist tracks, Horace Andy's voice just floats, creating a sound that is both beautiful and deeply unsettling. The thing is, this album became a massive underground hit, not just in the dance halls of Jamaica and New York, but also in the clubs of London. What many overlooked is how this record influenced a whole generation of electronic musicians. The British trip-hop group Massive Attack would later collaborate with Horace Andy, and you can hear the DNA of dancehall style all over their groundbreaking music. This album was a blueprint for the future sound of dancehall, but our next record takes that same idea and pushes it even further into the digital age. 11. Wayne Jarrett, Bubble Up Showcase, Volume 11982. The early 80s were a wild time for reggae music. Producers were starting to experiment with new digital technologies, creating a sound that was tougher, leaner, and more futuristic. A key figure in this movement was a singer named Wayne Jarrett. His 1982 album, Bubble Up, is a landmark of this transitional period. It was released in a showcase style, which meant each vocal track was immediately followed by its instrumental dub version, giving the listener a front-row seat to the producer's studio magic. But here is the real game changer. The album was one of the first to be built around rhythms created by a young, up-and-coming production duo named Sly and Robbie. They were masters of the new digital sound, and the rhythms they created for Bubble Up were absolutely crushing. The bass lines were heavy and hypnotic, and the drums had a sharp electronic edge that sounded like the future. This was a sound that was designed to move a crowd, and it quickly became the new standard in dancehall. You see, what many overlooked is that this album wasn't just a collection of songs, it was a statement of intent. It was announcing the arrival of a new, digital era in reggae music. The showcase format was also revolutionary. It put the focus not just on the singer, but on the producer and the rhythm itself. The thing is, this style of album became incredibly popular in the dancehall scene and helped to make the rhythm the most important element of the music. This album was a look into the digital future. But our next entry proves that the power of human harmony was still as potent as ever. 12. Lovejoys, Lovers Rock, Reggae Style, 1982. For a long time, the world of reggae was a man's world. The vast majority of stars were male, and the lyrics often reflected a male point of view. But in the late 70s and early 80s, a new sound called Lovers Rock began to change that, and one of the most important yet most overlooked groups in this movement was a female duo called Lovejoys. Their 1982 album, also called Lovers Rock, is a masterpiece of sweet harmonies and heartfelt emotion. But not all things are what they seem. While the name Lovers Rock might suggest a soft, sentimental album, the music of Lovejoys was anything but. Their harmonies were sweet, but their lyrics were strong and independent. They sang about love and relationships from a woman's perspective with an honesty and a power that was revolutionary for the time. You see, the album was a perfect blend of sweet and tough. The rhythms were classic, hard-hitting roots reggae, but the vocals were pure, soulful beauty. This contrast is what made their music so special. To put it mildly, Lovejoys never became big international stars. They remained a cult favorite, a secret shared among hardcore reggae fans. What many overlooked is that this album helped to open the door for a whole generation of female artists in reggae. They proved that women could be more than just backup singers, they could be the stars of the show. From the sweet sounds of love, our next album takes us on a deep spiritual journey that lasts for a full hour. 13. Ijahman Levi, Haile First, Hymn 1978. Ijahman Levi was a true reggae mystic. His music was a form of spiritual devotion, a deeply personal expression of his Rastafarian faith. In 1978, he released an epic two-record set called Haile I Hymn, an album that was a monumental tribute to the Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie I, who is considered a divine figure in the Rasta faith. The album consisted of just 4 songs, with each track taking up an entire side of a vinyl record. The absolutely stunning thing about this album is its sheer ambition. The songs are long, sprawling epics with hypnotic chanted vocals and lush orchestral arrangements. This was reggae on a symphonic scale, a sound that was both deeply spiritual and incredibly musical. You see, Ijahman Levi was using the studio to create a truly immersive experience. He wanted the listener to feel like they were in a holy place, a sanctuary of sound. To put it mildly, this album was a huge risk. In a world of 3-minute pop singles, releasing an album of 15-minute-long Rasta hymns was a bold move. But the thing is, the album became a massive underground hit, especially in the UK. What many overlooked is that Highly I Hymn resonated with a generation of young people who were searching for something deeper, something more meaningful in their music. It proved that reggae could be more than just dance music, it could be a profound spiritual journey. This album was a hymn to a king. Our next one was a cry of protest from the streets of a city under pressure. 14. Pablo Gad, Hard Times 1980. By 1980, the reggae scene in the United Kingdom had developed its own unique voice. It was a sound that was tougher, grittier, and more politically charged than much of the music coming out of Jamaica. A key figure in this UK roots scene was a singer named Pablo Gad. His 1980 album, Hard Times, is a raw, powerful document of life for black youth in Britain during a time of social and economic turmoil. But here is the crucial detail. The album's title track, Hard Times, became an anthem for a generation. It was a song that spoke directly to the struggles of living in a society that was often hostile and unwelcoming. The lyrics were a powerful indictment of poverty, unemployment, and social injustice, all delivered with a passion and an urgency that was impossible to ignore. You see, this was music that had a purpose. It wasn't just about entertainment, it was about survival. What many overlooked is that this album helped to define the sound of UK roots reggae. The rhythms were heavy and militant, with a deep, throbbing bass that you could feel in your chest. And Pablo Gad's voice was a clarion call, a voice of defiance in the face of adversity. To put it mildly, this album didn't get a lot of radio play. It was too raw, too political for the mainstream. But its impact on the streets was undeniable. From the harsh reality of the streets, our next album takes us to a more gentle, melodic place. 15. Laxley Castell, Morning Glory 1982. Laxley Castell was a young singer with an old soul. He had a sweet, melodic voice that was perfect for the emerging lovers rock and early dancehall scenes of the early 80s. He was a rising star, a protege of the legendary producer Augustus Pablo, and his future seemed incredibly bright. His 1982 album, Morning Glory, is a beautiful, timeless record that showcases his incredible talent. But there is a tragic side to this story. The thing is, Morning Glory would be one of the only albums Laxley Castell would ever release. He passed away not long after it was made, at a very young age. This gives the album a bittersweet quality, a sense of what could have been. You see, the music on Morning Glory is full of life and optimism. The rhythms are classic, early dancehall, and Castell's voice just glides over them with an effortless grace. What many overlooked is how this album helped to bridge the gap between the conscious sound of roots reggae and the more romantic, melodic sound of lovers rock. Castell could sing about love with the same passion and sincerity that other singers reserved for spiritual matters. To put it mildly, this album is a lost classic, a beautiful and haunting record from an artist who left us far too soon. This album was the sound of a sweet voice silenced too early. Our next one is the sound of a rebel who refused to be quiet. 16. Willie Williams, Messenger Man 1980. Willie Williams is the man behind one of the most famous and most sampled reggae songs of all time, Armageddon Time. But he is far from a one-hit wonder. He is a true original, a singer and producer with a unique vision. His 1980 album, Messenger Man, is a masterpiece of roots reggae, a record that is both deeply spiritual and incredibly innovative. It was produced at the legendary Studio One, the Motown of Jamaica, but it sounds like nothing else that ever came out of that famous studio. But here is the amazing part of the story. Williams took the classic Studio One sound and twisted it into something new and strange. He slowed the rhythms down to a crawl, creating a sound that was heavy and hypnotic. He used strange, otherworldly sound effects and his voice to create a sense of deep mystery. You see, this album was a perfect example of how reggae was constantly evolving, with artists taking the old sounds and making them new again. The thing is, Messenger Man became a huge influence on a new generation of musicians, not just in reggae, but in other genres as well. The punk band The Clash famously covered Armageddon Time, and the heavy, atmospheric sound of this album can be heard in the work of many electronic and hip-hop producers. What many overlooked is that Willie Williams was a true visionary, an artist who was always one step ahead of the game. From a messenger with a serious warning, we go to a man who delivered his messages with a sense of humor and a whole lot of style. 17. Mikey Dread, World War III, 1980. Mikey Dread wasn't just a musician, he was a media personality. He had a popular radio show in Jamaica called Dread at the Controls, and he brought that same manic energy and creativity to his own records. His 1980 album, World War III, is a wild, unpredictable ride, a record that combines heavy roots reggae with sound effects, radio jingles, and Mikey's own unique style of toasting, which is a form of Jamaican rapping. But the real story here is how this album broke down the wall between the artist and the audience. Mikey Dread was one of the first reggae artists to truly understand the power of media. He used his radio show to promote his own music and the music of other up-and-coming artists. And his albums felt like an extension of his show, full of humor, social commentary, and, of course, amazing music. You see, World War III was a concept album of sorts, a warning about the dangers of global conflict, but it was delivered with a sense of fun and creativity that was infectious. What many overlooked is that Mikey Dread's playful, experimental style had a huge impact on the development of hip-hop. Early hip-hop DJs and rappers heard his records and were inspired by his use of sound effects and his charismatic vocal delivery. The thing is, he would later go on to work with The Clash, bringing his unique sound to a whole new audience.